Hello. We are now live. It's been a while, but we are back. And by we, I mean myself and my guests. But right now, it's just me. I'm Greg Swartz, the big man half of the Big Man We Dram. There will be some We Drams coming. And today's We Drams will be this, which we will discuss momentarily. So without further ado, I'm going to bring in our guests today. I don't even know if I should call Nate. Are you a guest or are you co-host? We're kind of like co-hosts, right?
Yeah, I've been on more than right. A few months.
So, in case anyone doesn't know or can't read the names at the bottom of it, I'm joined today with our producer Nate Barlow, and our guest is Nora Ganley-Roper from Lost Lantern.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
I always miss doing this. At least one of the things I like about it is that I can start drinking whiskey on noon on a Friday. It's a work obligation. So I'm going to introduce this really quickly because I'm going to let you introduce it better than I'm going to introduce it. But this is Shadow and Light. This is our first collaborative bottling with the new series. And this is, as we always look for, a whiskey that tells a story that reflects the story that the series told. So I will shut up, let Nora tell you some technical things about it, but also then we can discuss how it reflects the story.
Yeah. So a quick background on Lost Lantern, because it'll explain why we made what we did. We're an independent bottler. We're in the new docuseries that Greg and Nate have. But we are different than a lot of the independent bottlers that are in there because we're entirely focused on American whiskey. So we take the tradition of the Scottish IB and we apply it to the American market. So when I started talking to Greg and Nate about making a whiskey to go along with the series, we wanted to tip our hat to history while also having a unique American spin. So it's a blend of peated and mesquited single malt because there are a couple of American single malt producers in the Southwest that are doing exactly what peated single malt producers do, but they swap in the mesquite. So we blended those together to showcase tradition and innovation in a uniquely American perspective.
That was a much better job and shorter than I would have done that over a course of 10 minutes.
Likewise.
We can go into as many details as we want, but I usually start a little bit pithy and then we can decide where we want to head from there.
Well, before I even sip this, I want to the color of this whiskey is insane. I absolutely love the color of this, and that's not the only thing I love about it. But the color is just, considering it's this isn't it's not even that it's dark. It's just very, very rich and vibrant and almost
exactly
electric.
Rich was exactly the word I was going to say.
I was going to say that's the fun of American climate. So if you're used to Scotch, it takes so long for the barrel to extract. Whereas we have a whiskey from Arizona and that's a year-old whiskey and it has so much flavor and barrel that come into the whiskey in just a short amount of time. But it also brings the beautiful color.
Yeah. I also like the fact that mesquite can now be a verb.
Exactly. Yes.
It took me a couple years to break down my computer's desire to correct peated to seeded. I've taught it the word peated, but I have not taught it the word mesquited yet.
It will take probably the same amount of time, yeah, or longer.
It's funny, mine still I don't think recognizes peated. Yet there are so many bizarre Gaelic distillery spellings, which has no problem with whatsoever.
I think I had to force it. You can say learn this word, and I think I had to do that with peated. I know I had to do it with Berkladi.
Oh, I can imagine.
Nadia picked up very quickly for me. It actually just learned it on its own. Like this, you would like this for some reason.
So, and I'm going to assume that some of the people who might watch this have seen the series, some have not. But in case anyone hasn't, one of the things that this kind of grew out of the first film, and one of the things that we were doing is really kind of keeping our eyes and ears open for new bottlers that offered a different perspective. And, and I know, Nora, I've said this to you directly, but, all of a sudden you guys, Lost Lantern just popped up on our proverbial radar. And I think it was me and Nate independently at the same time. You know, and it was just, it's always cool to sort of, the only industry I pay enough attention to for this to happen is whiskey, but like it's in the zeitgeist. It just sort of takes hold. And then, you know, you guys are, like you said, pretty unique, you know, and one of the things we're always looking for is a connection to the past, but not someone that's just living there, you know? And so like you guys have a sort of a more traditional business model in a non-traditional setting.
Right. Well, and both Adam, who's my co-founder, and I come from the industry, and we drank a lot of IB Scotch and loved it and spent years complaining about how the model didn't exist in the US. And it's the classic, if you're in the industry, you see something before everyone else. And we wanted that tradition here. And then eventually, after years of complaining, we finally said, okay, fine, we'll do it ourselves. So yeah, definitely a hat tip to tradition pretty consistently in what we do.
So there's a number of people who have been saying hello in the chat here via YouTube or via Facebook, but I don't see any questions yet. But I have a question myself that I'd like to ask you. Tell me what your first experience was like when you started reaching out to distilleries that probably had never been approached by independent bottlers before, like especially newer distilleries. Like how'd that go?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because we're in the US, especially with what we're doing, it's not just single malt. We also work with bourbon, rye, basically any American whiskey. We've probably done something. When we reached out to American single malt producers, they were so excited. They knew exactly what this was, and they felt like it was a sign of the industry maturing in the United States, that there were enough distilleries across the US doing enough exciting things for an independent bottler to even make sense. For bourbon and rye producers, they kind of looked at us and were like, what are you talking about? Why would you buy my whiskey? Why would you put my name on it? The tradition, in many ways, before we started, with some exceptions, was to buy whiskey and then blend it and talk about the art of the blend. And you might be fully transparent about the sourcing, but the underlying liquid and distillery stories weren't something that was being talked about in the same way in the US as you see in Scotland. And so it took, for some bourbon and rye producers, it took a conversation, and we were able to win them over. Some of them, it took years, and we had to show what we were doing until they finally came into the fold. But I think once a distillery realizes that our entire job is to talk about how they're awesome and why you should love their whiskey, it becomes a much easier conversation than when they think like, oh, I'm scared of you putting my brand on your bottle. You then have control over it. But it's over time, it's become much and much and much easier. And these days we regularly have distilleries reaching out to us because they want to partner and be part of the Lost Lantern program. Nice.
That's really cool that it's kind of caught on to that level, you know. And it makes sense that the single malt distillers here, because anyone who's making American single malt is going to have at least some experience with single malt elsewhere, and that would be Scotland, and that would be, they would learn that word. You know what I mean? Like you could go, if you played your whole life and your whole career in bourbon, you may not experience it as much, but
did the American single, I mean, obviously they were the first for just that reason, but did they help sell? Because obviously some do single malt and bourbon, and did their example help with the bourbon and rye producers? Like, hey, so I know these guys, they're doing this with them, that helping selling it to them?
Yeah, having Balcones sign on very, very, very early with us was a really big help, because they're a big name in craft distilling. And I mean, we think that they have the biggest SMWS collection in the state of Texas, so are huge IB fans. And they were really excited about Lost Lantern. And then they also have name recognition outside of the American single malt community, and having them on board and then a few other players definitely helped, because we were able to say, these guys have signed on. Don't you want to be part of this? There's such a halo effect when done right with working with an independent bottler. And it did translate into more yeses than we might have gotten otherwise.
We're getting some questions now, although I have to say the first two came from insiders. So Alphonse, our producer Alphonse, asked, where did the name Lost Lantern come from? Which is a great question, because I don't know it.
So we love alliteration here at Lost Lantern. A lot of our whiskeys are named things like Gentle Giant, Mountain Meadow, Opulent Orchard. But the idea behind Lost Lantern is that we're shining a light on whiskey that would otherwise be lost. So.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And it helps that Adam's a writer. So he can do all of that. I can take no credit for the name.
I love all your names. Your name, like Opulent Orchard, and it's perfect for the whiskey. It's just I've had it and it's great. It's like they were just the right name.
And we should probably point out too that even the name Shadow and Light of this whiskey is that, that's in case anyone, well, I assume most people don't know this, but that's occasionally the way people describe filmmaking, is that you're sculpting with shadow and light, cinematography specifically. But so, it's the whole thing it really fits. So my co-director on this, Guy Satchwell, is watching, and he has a question, and it's long, so I'm going to read it. In the film, Arthur Motley points out that in the past, a lot of folk thought of IBs as selling that knockoff Rolex on the beach or something similar, but that perception is reversing. That's not a question, that's a statement, but I agree with him. I didn't realize till the end. Oh, there you go. Sorry, there's the second part of it. Do you think that that's not a struggle to achieve in the U.S.?
I think that the helpful thing for us here in the U.S. is that there's already a private barrel culture here, and those are already sought after. So a lot of stores will go and do special barrels, and so people are primed for those collectibles, those different sides of what distilleries are already doing. I think there is some question about if we're getting the cast-offs of the distilleries, stuff like that, but the answer is always no. We're getting the cool stuff that the distiller usually has tucked somewhere, and they don't want to blend away into other things. But I think, yeah, I mean, for now, we're the player in the American whiskey space that across the board. There are a couple of other independent bottlers like Single Cask Nation who do American whiskey, but they don't focus on it and don't. We've worked with 40 distilleries now across 24 states. And the bigger hurdle for us is just telling people what an independent bottler is. And usually there isn't a preconceived notion about the kind of potential underbelly of the structure of what we're doing, fortunately, so far.
Yeah, and it's one of the things I've had people ask me when I talk about Lost Lantern is they're like, "Oh, where's the distillery?" And it's like, because they just assume there's so many distilleries that popped up in the U.S., so many that the first assumption people make is, "Oh, that's another new distillery." Not it's a different business altogether. But that's the question. That's the wrong question I've been asked a few times. Oh, where's the distillery?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way that we describe to American whiskey drinkers that have no idea what an independent bottler is that we're curators and blenders. Because in the U.S., one of the interesting things that we do is there are over 3,000 distilleries in the U.S. now. Unlike in Scotland, where people that are really engaged in Scotch know the vast majority of the distilleries and can probably find their way to getting their hands on that whiskey. In the U.S., some of the best distilleries, people outside of that region have never heard of and would never even know to try their whiskey. So part of what we're doing is sifting through those 3,000 distilleries and highlighting the really great places that are more regionally focused and aren't widely available. So there is it's a classic model, but it applied in the US on a much bigger industry. From a distillery quantity perspective, it ends up articulating itself in a slightly different way.
A couple of years ago, right before, probably just a few months before we first connected, I was back in Connecticut, and actually I had a dinner with Joshua from Single Cask Nation, and we went to this near where my mother lives, this pizza restaurant and whiskey bar, a nice combination. And I had one, and again, it was so local that we were doing a little family excursion the next day, and I made the whole family stop because I had found a store that had it, because I knew there was no way I would be able to find this back here in California. And so, I mean, because of the size of the country, I mean, the physical and the size just means that hyper locality, along with the legal rules of each state, and there's so many, I think, variables that make that so much more complex.
Yeah, exactly. And we spend so much time on the road visiting distilleries. Like Adam is traveling probably 1 week out of every month to even see what's out there, let alone buy whiskey from them.
We have a question from Russell that's kind of what we're talking about. Does the U.S. market get the IB market? It's big here in Scotland. I mean, it's different, but I definitely think they do. In the places that get it, you know, like the whiskey shops. I could go to 2 or 3 whiskey shops near me. And I mean, I'm in LA, I'm in a major market, but I certainly could go get good IBs at a couple of liquor stores, but I'm not going to find them at the grocery store, or, you know, I'm not going to find them at a sort of, well, maybe a few in like a Bevmo or a big chain liquor store, but not a lot. Right.
Total Wine has some, but that's the only one I've seen with a significant number among a bigger.
Yeah, but I mean, K&L does a lot of stuff with independent bottlers. And K&L, you were talking, Nora, about cask programs. I mean, K&L does K&L exclusives with independent bottlers. I mean, it's like talk about hyper locality. Like, you know, there's every year around Christmas, there's a bunch of Hunter Lang K&L exclusives that are like these holiday single casks that are exclusive to them. I mean, that just speaks a lot to the influence of K&L, I think, at least in California. There
are a couple of key stores in each of the markets that draw those really cool picks and drinkers who want those. I think Scotch drinkers in the US get IBs, but if people come from the bourbon side or rye side, generally they've never heard of independent bottling, or the term is often used incorrectly or not historically in those places. So a lot of places that buy MGP and then bottle it are called independent bottlers in the bourbon community. And it's actually created some interesting kind of educational opportunities for us to explain what the tradition means. It doesn't just mean you're putting whiskey in a bottle and you don't have a distillery. There is a transparency expectation. There's a storytelling expectation that comes along with the historic use of that. But it's been kind of an interesting dance because you can't tell a retailer that's not an independent bottler without annoying them. But trying to create that education in the bourbon community, that because generally it's like we actually sell more to bourbon drinkers than to Scotch drinkers, because there's an adventurous side of exploration in American whiskey that we find a lot in that community. That Scotch drinkers, it's harder to convince them to drink American single malt than it is to convince a bourbon drinker to drink American single malt. So we've gotten better traction there, but people still don't necessarily know that we're an independent bottler, that's what we're called. So
I can't tell how many times I've had to explain how the MGP model is not the same. I can understand where they're coming from, and there's on the surface it might seem that way, but how it's really a different.
I mean, we actually classify sourcing in the United States in 3 ways. Like you have a blending house, like a Compass Box in Scotland, or like a Barrel Craft Spirits here in the US. And then you have NDP or non-distiller producer, and that's like someone. Sorry, something is going off. You have the non-distiller producer that just buys an MDP and blends it themselves and isn't particularly transparent about it. That doesn't really exist in Scotland, but all of those exist. And then you have the classic independent bottler, and those are often very confusing and glommed together into the like sourcing companies here in the US. And it's kind of a marketing nightmare and also a huge, wonderful marketing opportunity if we handle it correctly. So.
Let me ask you a question about that. What about where would when you're talking about the categories in the U.S.? I don't know. This is a question I'm actually asking here. I'm not.
Yeah.
Where would like white label, like grocery store brands and stuff like that, or because like Nate mentioned Total Wine, they have loads of their own brands. Their own like where would that fall in?
So I would put that probably in the NDP-esque category, where it's not about the underlying. It's so. Blending houses, it's about the art of the blend and how beautiful whiskey can be when you bring multiple things together. And then NDP is making a great whiskey, but it being about the brand. So with white label stuff, it's because it's the total. A lot of independent bottlers do those white labeling stuff. But I think when you aren't being transparent about that underlying distillery, it stops fitting into the independent bottler category.
I would say with the white label is probably the only time we really see NDP with Scottish whiskey, and it's here, not over there, because there are some white labeling NDP type Scotch releases.
Yeah, just the other day, someone who's not in the whiskey industry asked me, or they told me about a local distillery in their hometown. They said they just opened and they already won a major award. And I said, really? And they said, yeah. And I said, do you have the bottle? And he said, yeah, I do. And I said, look at the back of that bottle. Does that say distilled in Indiana? And he looked and he was like, how did you know that? I said, I can tell you exactly how I know that. And I can tell you exactly what that is. And, it was sort of this kind of like, all these tumblers aligning in that one moment. But, no harm, no foul. I mean, I realize these companies have to get product on the shelves or sell gin or vodka or wait for years, so.
And MGP makes delicious whiskey. Don't get me wrong, but it's just a different model. It's just
yeah, for sure. It's just different model. Yeah. Well, so let's talk about this whiskey a little bit.
Yeah.
Because now I'm reading. I'm not going to. Well, I can try to hold this up. I don't know if it will resolve itself. There you go. These are the 4 distilleries that contributed spirit that made this whiskey, which is Cedar Ridge, McCarthy's, Santa Fe Spirits, Whiskey Delbach.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about that and how this whiskey kind of came to be?
So Cedar Ridge and McCarthy's, both wonderful, more classic American single malt producers. McCarthy's is actually the OG. They were the first American single malt producer. They actually even get Isla peat. They're the only American distillery that has Isla peat, or Isla peated malt that makes its way over here. And they make a relatively smoky peated single malt for the US. Honestly, nothing is smoked the same way. There's no like Port Charlotte. There's not even like an Ardbeg or anything like that. But you still get some nice peat. But I love what they do. They're a lesser known distillery that's been around for forever. And so we wanted to feature them in this, kind of speaking to the tradition. And Cedar Ridge is more of, they've really gained traction in American single malt in the last decade. And they are a distillery that's in Iowa, and they actually are the top selling bourbon producer in the state of Iowa. They outsell Jim Beam, they outsell Buffalo Trace, and they've really made a name for themselves in Iowa, but very, very few people have heard of them outside of Iowa. And I think that they're one of the few distilleries that both make stunning whiskey on its own in a single cask form, but their whiskey also blends well with others. We find that whiskey is either blending stock or single cask stock, and they don't generally work for both, but Cedar Ridge is an exception. So I generally like to use their whiskey and blends because it's wonderful glue that brings everything together. Santa Fe Spirits is in Santa Fe, New Mexico. They are one of the 2 mesquite smoked single malt distilleries that we love, along with Whiskey Delbach, which is in Tucson, Arizona. Definitely a different style of smoke, but I think it's been really fun to play with blending because it's a little bit more of like an orangey char note than the kind of classic peat profile to it. Whiskey Delbach does all of their own malting on site, which I think is really, really cool. If you're ever in Tucson, worth checking out. They're a very unique distillery. The blend itself is about 25% mesquited single malt to 75% peated single malt, which you would never guess from the flavor profile. But the mesquite, when you blend them together, is so dominant that I had to balance it out that way to make it actually taste and smell like it's roughly equal parts.
I couldn't agree more. I've had some of the Delbach mesquited on its own, and it's almost too much at times. It's almost like it may as well be the last thing that you drink of the day because it will be the last thing you taste. And I love the balance you've struck because it's decidedly not just a peated whiskey. It doesn't even nose like a peated whiskey. It's I was in New Mexico last year and I ate these incredible mesquite smoked hatch chilies on an omelet. It was just this amazing. It was one of the best meals I've ever eaten. And this completely took me right there because there's that mesquite note that's just that uniquely kind of Southwestern vibe, And I like how you've managed to make them play nicely together, which I imagine wasn't easy.
Blending smoked whiskey is the hardest thing I have to do. I blend bourbon and rye all the time, and it's straightforward, but not having palate and nose fatigue when you blend smoked stuff, especially when there's trying to find balance between mesquite and peat, this definitely took longer than any other blend I've made, just because I'd have to take so many breaks between tasting things.
Yeah, I remember the very first tasting I ever went to. And Nate, not the first tasting I ever went to in general, but the first tasting I ever went to that had Octomore at it. I think you were there, Nate. I think it was me and you and Trevor. But anyway, so. I remember Trevor texting the next morning and said, I just finished brushing my teeth, and I swear there's peat in my toothpaste now.
I just want to say Cedar Ridge is one where talking about what you do as a bottler for recognition of a distillery. Because I had it once before we met, and one little bit, and that's all I knew, and just kind of, and so much more through your bottlings have I gotten to know it and see it and get it, see it outside of that limited scope, and it's a fantastic distillery. I've loved every single thing I've had from there. Yeah,
they are one of those distilleries that does not miss. They make great rye, they make great bourbon, they make a whole swath of single malt. With their focus is on secondary barrel maturation, which is somewhat unusual in the American market, but they've done some amazing things lately on that front.
Of the 4 distilleries that are, I should point out, especially because I know a number of our friends in Scotland are watching this. If this were in Scotland, this would be a blended malt. Mm-hmm. Because these are all 4 single malts from 4 different distilleries. So the only one I've never had on its own is I don't believe I've ever had anything from Santa Fe Springs on its own. I've had the other 3 for sure. Not the same, not necessarily these components, because I don't know that I've ever had a peated Cedar Ridge, but I've had Cedar Ridge, and so it's been interesting to drink this side by side with some of those other whiskeys, to try to pick up the distillery character that kind of comes through.
Yeah, when it comes to Santa Fe, so when we think about mesquite single malt, we think Whiskey del Bach is as Ardbeg, trying to think of the right way to articulate this. As Ardbeg is to Bowmore, Whiskey del Bach is to Santa Fe Spirits. So a little bit more delicate, a little bit sweeter kind of styling.
Mm-hmm. We have a question from Alphonse again. Said, "Is wood your favorite color to paint with?" Which is a line from Billy Walker in the first film.
So the interesting thing about being an American independent bottler is we don't do as much of our own barrel choices. We're buying mature whiskey, so we're not filling new make and putting it into barrel and doing a first fill sherry versus a first fill port. Sometimes our distillery partners are finishing things or doing maturation, but we are showing more about climate than about the whiskey itself, which is different and allows us in some ways less flexibility, but also we're really showing that distillery in its unadulterated form before I blend it. Obviously, this is something that I built, but when we're thinking about individual single casks, it's all about showing climate.
Which is something that's not talked about as much by a long shot, and really is the bigger picture is probably that needs to be discussed more and studied.
Well, just to point out, I put up a link here to your website, to the Shadow and Light page on your website. I'm also going to share a banner here. The bottle is available for pre-order on Drinky. We have our own page on Drinky, and the bottle is available there right now, which I'm going to show. Here we go. There's the Drinky one. I will also put it in the chat, so you don't have to try to. I realize that just looking at this on screen means you'd have to type the whole thing, and that would be pretty annoying. So I'm going to put both of these links in the chat, and then they should be dynamic. But one of the things that I'm curious about, as I've been doing a lot of learning I guess, if about the sort of state of wood policy in the U.S. moving forward. Like, what do you think? This is a little bit of a divergence from what we've been talking about, but with so American whiskey focusing on virgin wood, but that's changing, and there's so many distilleries now that have taken advantage of different regulations that have made that available to reuse wood and different things. Do you think that's going to become a more central piece of the American whiskey experience?
Yes and yes. I was going to say yes and no, but I think leaning more towards yes, because I think the tradition of finishing is becoming a really important part of the American whiskey tradition. The full maturation is really only available for American single malt and corn whiskey, and like you can use it in other ways, but to call it its standard profile, those are the options. So we are seeing some of that in American single malt, but I think when it comes to bourbon and rye, because you're required to use new American oak for its primary maturation, finishing is where it happens. Our whole spring collection for Lost Lantern was actually all about the new finishing traditions that we're seeing in the US, where distilleries are starting to purchase used barrels from local places like wineries and breweries. And we had a bunch of apple brandy finished whiskey and even a tequila finished whiskey from Texas, where they got the barrels from just across the border. So I do think in some ways it's going to only become another layer on top of American whiskey, but the full maturation in some ways, because bourbon is king here, for better and for worse, it limits the potential uses versus places like Scotland, where that is such a huge part of this, especially for an independent bottler, of what the decision-making process looks like when deciding what to do with a whiskey.
Can I ask you something there? You said the full maturation, American single malt, for obvious reasons, but also corn whiskey. How so for the corn whiskey, or why the corn whiskey?
So corn whiskey, the specifications are that you can use used cooperage for corn whiskey. It's one of the rare ones. I mean, corn whiskey, it gets a bad rap in my mind. Iron Root Republic in Texas makes amazing corn whiskey, where they're selecting specific corn types that are often heirloom corn and pairing it with the barrel. So new oak, or really used, like previously used oak or European oak, or all of those things, and they're thinking about that at a really deep level. But corn whiskey in some ways is the younger sibling of bourbon, and people don't pay as much attention to it.
Sure.
That's interesting.
That made me think of Anson Mills and like their very specific picked grains and like doing that whiskey.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because I think people tend to think with corn whiskey that it's basically moonshine, but and it doesn't have to be. I mean, it certainly can be.
Yeah, our first collection had a $120 bottle of corn whiskey, and we thought it would not sell because we expected people to have that preconceived notion, but it was snapped. It sold out in a day. So I think the type of people that we sell to are looking for new, innovative, exciting things, and are willing to look outside of, people think of moonshine, or they think of mellow corn, and honestly, I like mellow corn in the right context, but it's not seen necessarily as a luxury whiskey like a lot of other things.
So you said your first collection, because I would have understood, because maybe like a couple down the line where you've established your brand and your reputation, that, I'm going to do this because Lost Lantern trusts it. I'm going to trust it. But even on your first collection,
it was probably the best thing that we tasted when we went on our 8-month road trip, which when we decided to start Lost Lantern, we actually spent 8 months on the road visiting distilleries to make sure that people would sell us whiskey, because we knew the idea in theory worked, but if no one sold us whiskey, it didn't matter. And that was probably top 5 things that we tasted. And we looked at each other and said, why are we doing this if we're not buying and releasing this kind of product? This is what we should be showcasing. If we're trying to show the full swath, the full landscape of American whiskey, we have to do this. And it could have gone horribly wrong, but it ended up being very, very, very successful for us early on.
the filmmaker in me has to ask, did you guys document your 8-month road trip?
I mean, we have some photos, but not in the way that in retrospect, that we should have. Because at the time we were like, this might not work out. Who knows?
If you have, we would offer to edit it and make it into a film at this point.
Yeah.
There's almost no video footage, unfortunately. But yeah, in retrospect, I'm like.
Well, I have to say, I have yet to visit your facility. I'm hoping that changes this summer when I'm near Vermont, but I have yet to do so. And you guys operate like a company that has dozens of people behind it. I mean, the output you do, the speed, the volume, the variety, the different variety of locations, the geographic differences, it really feels like, a very large operation. And I realize it's not.
No, there are 4 of us right now. We're hiring actively right now, which will be huge. But yeah, there are 4 of us, and I'm actually in our barrel house right now because our tasting room's open. So yeah, small team, but small but mighty.
Well, it's funny. I think it was the first conversation I ever had with Adam. You were there too, but I feel like it was Adam that said this, that it's interesting that the U.S. doesn't have any regionality to its whiskey, whereas Scotland, which is so much a smaller place, has 5 different regions. And there's whether it's accurate anymore, that's a different conversation, but there's an expectation of difference in the different regions. There's a history and a kind of a traceable heritage to these different regions, where in the US, I mean, how different is Vermont from Texas and Seattle and Hawaii and,
Right.
Kentucky for that matter, huge variety, and yet there's no regional differentiation that's been codified by any trade organization.
Yeah. I mean, it exists, it just isn't recognized.
Right. Yeah. It's just not, it hasn't been no one's built up no one's made a map.
And I think the interesting thing is it's only just starting to emerge. What parts of climate in many ways you can't escape. Because with craft distillers in the United States, most of them are 15 years and younger. And a lot of what they were doing was working against climate. So doing climate control or trying to replicate either Scotland or Kentucky in a lot of meats. That's not true of everyone. And but at the beginning, it was a lot of learning and trying to even understand the climate and where things are going. And there was a lot of use of smaller barrels. And I think only in the last, say, 10 years are we seeing the maturation of the whiskey enough so you can point out consistency distillery to distillery. And we see decision making makes such a big difference in what you're doing, because it's not just single malt or something along those lines or grain whiskey. It's like bourbon, decisions about bourbon versus single malt versus rye. There's so many different choices that, for us, looking at the northern part of the US, we're just starting to see what it means to make a cool climate rye. Just that there's consistency to the palate, there's a creaminess to the palate, that at Lost Lantern, we're one of the very few places that has enough of a bird's eye view to even see that yet, because things are regionally focused and because distilleries are just maturing. I think it's been impossible to have any specific understanding of what is regionally specific until just now, and probably most people don't even get a chance to see it yet. But that's why independent bottlers are important, because we can tell those stories and help people experience that bird's eye view to a greater or lesser extent.
Go ahead, Nate.
You can see that bottle that I mentioned earlier from having to pick up because I knew it was a cold climate northern rye. I also want to ask, you said earlier 3,000 distilleries in the U.S., and you said most craft distilleries in the last 15 years. So about what percentage of that would have been around 15 years ago?
So 2011 was 234 distilleries.
That's a precipitous rise.
It's just an absolute explosion of distilleries, and it took a while for people to figure out how to distill in different climates. Who before distilleries in Colorado or Wyoming, who was distilling it at true altitude? No one knew how to run a still at altitude until these distilleries started doing it. And then you make a ton of mistakes, and then you finally dial it in, and the whiskey is beautiful now, but it took a long time. You couldn't just take the Kentucky or Scottish method for running a still and have it taste good. It might taste super musty. It might taste really weird because you're in a different climate. So that's the blessing and the curse of being in the US is the climates are distinct. So they make really interesting whiskey, but it takes forever for distilleries to figure out how to dial in their process to make that whiskey.
That's interesting because you think like of the early adopters of single malt in the US, right? At least the ones McCarthy's, Westland. Oh gosh, what's the other one in Oregon? Westward, yes. Like, okay, so those climates are relatively Scottish-y climates, right? Yeah. But then you have Balcones, which is just like, nope, not even remotely close.
And the early days of Balcones, they were in small barrels in the Texas climate, and so it tasted nothing like Scotch. Now they're in 60-gallon, like 200-liter barrels because they're trying to balance the Texas climate, but they're still playing to figure out what works best there. They couldn't just take the model of Scotland. They do have Forsyth stills for those that care about that, but they have really had to dial in the barrel maturation to fit the climate.
I don't know. I'm honestly do not know the phenolic numbers on this whiskey. But it's funny because it's such a lower, the phenols are not there. It's a different kind of smoke. It's that kind of woodier, almost sweeter smoke that's from the mesquite.
It transitions over too. It's starts sweeter and there's a little bit more ashiness, I think, on the back end.
Yeah.
You get both sides across the whole sip.
Yeah. I mean, this is absolutely a completely unique whiskey. I mean, it literally is. I mean, and that it's a blend from 4 distilleries, but at the same time, it's also just, I've never had a whiskey quite like it. And I'm trying to think of what it would pair well with. And I kind of want to, what it makes me want to do? It makes me want to eat corn on the cob.
Yeah.
Like on the grill.
Or like barbecue. I think.
Yeah.
That kind of flavor, it would be the classic like with like flavor profile where you get the rich, smoky, kind of meaty aspect to the whiskey pairing well with the meat.
There's a
pizza.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a salad that I like. There's a place near us that's like it's a salad place. They have a salad called the Cowboy, which I probably don't need to say any more than that, but this would be the greatest because it's basically black beans, corn, grilled chicken, and there's a barbecue. There's a smokiness in the dressing. It's like a vinaigrette with like a mesquite wood vinaigrette. This would be, I could literally, pair this with that all the time. But it's definitely taking me to the Southwest, which I'm in the Southwest as luck would have it. So I don't have to go that far.
One of those great New Mexican meals.
I don't think there's a lot of mesquite wood in LA.
No.
There might be more than I know. There might be people. People might write to us and say there's a ton, but not that I'm aware of.
It could be typically Los Angeles. I miss this. I'm going to start growing and build. People that's very might get some completely random regional specialties in Los Angeles. Like I don't miss this, so I'm going to make it happen.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, no. This is I love the story that this whiskey tells, and not just that. I mean, that wouldn't be enough. That would be great, but that wouldn't be enough because what I mean by that is like I love drinking it. I don't just love the story. The story gets me to taste it. The deliciousness brings me back to it. And I've put a pretty good dent in it already. Not just today, but before today. Just kind of learning the ropes of it, if you will, and I don't even have whiskeys to compare it to but I mean, it's definitely like, for some of our friends in Scotland and stuff, it's definitely not going to be unrecognizable as a single malt, as a peated single malt, but it's just it's like someone spiked the peat with some other fuel.
I love that. I mean, I think it has just enough peat to be something that feels familiar while also being entirely different than what you're used to.
Which isn't that always the goal, to make something you know recognizable enough you're not going to turn off people, but unique enough that it's like, wow, that's something different, and I want to go more.
Right. Well, and we knew that you all were going to be partnering with other people, and we wanted to make sure that that we would show this other side of what's happening in the U.S. So.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, you guys, you know, Alphonse says there is peat in LA County, not in LA City, but in LA County. So I don't know if he looked that up or he just knows that. You can't tell.
It's the kind of thing that Alphonse would know.
Yeah, it is. He could tell you where it is. He could probably give you the GPS coordinates. But
probably has photos of it.
But yeah, I lost my train of thought about the whiskey itself. But one of the things you guys, I know what I was going to say, is you guys seem to have like a lot of blue water behind you. Like, you know, there might be other people looking to do this, but no one's doing it. And I've never had a whiskey even remotely like this. Not to say that all of your whiskeys are like this far out from the expectation. They're not, but I'm saying the ability, the flexibility, and that's kind of what drew me and Guy to the Guy. And I had a lot of conversations early on about independent bottlers and what we really found intriguing and what we didn't really want to focus on, you know, and we wound up, as Nate knows, we wound up focusing on all of them, on everything, because I mean, the scope creep was pretty monumental. But you know, but at the same time, it was the flexibility to be creative, and that was really one of the words that I used all the time in laying this out and developing this, is the flexibility of independent bottlers compared to, like, you know, some gigantic established global brand of whiskey that they don't want to risk alienating one iota of their audience. But this is just music for a different ear, you know?
Yeah. For us, a lot about being an independent bottler in the US is inviting people to explore with us. And that means that it's not the same every time. We're never going to make a whiskey that tastes exactly like the whiskey we made before. And people love that and they hate it, but it does allow us to be creative and to be responsive to what people are excited about and also discoveries we make. So Adam can come back from a trip and be like, oh my God, I discovered this thing. And it just snowballs into a bigger project or a blend or something like that. And yeah, we have space to kind of do what we're excited about. And that's what is great about being an independent bottler. There are no preconceived notions here about what we should or should not be doing.
What's interesting, and before I was in whiskey, I was in wine, is that there, where it's not even, you know, an independent bottler situation, but even because everyone has so long recognized there are vintage variations. There's no, unless you're making a bulk, $2 chuck, no longer $2, but blend that's supposed to kind of sound, not that it has any character in the first place, two evens. You know, everyone it recognizes you're not going to have the same flavor profile each year from the same winemaker, even from the same vineyard, from everything else being identical because of the yearly variation. And, you know, it goes to the sense of terroir and the discussions about that in whiskey, is that there's always, but there it's not even the independent bottler. It's not about replicating, it's just making the best thing that you can with what you have each year, or with each.
Right.
And that's one of the things I always liked about our conversations about independent bottling, is it comes down to the bottler. Like, trust. I don't know this whiskey. I liked this. I liked A and I liked B and I liked C. I don't know what D is, but the person that blended A, B, and C, I liked that. So it kind of cultivates. It's built around, well, in this case, you.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I should have. No, I was just going to say, I should have pointed out at the beginning of this that you're not only the co-founder, but you're the blender. Like, you know, I don't know that I ever actually said that specifically, but you are the blender. So it's you in this case that we're following.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Adam is the head of sourcing, so he's out discovering the whiskeys, and then we pick every barrel together, and then I blend from there. So it's a really good balance between the two of us. But yeah, trust is ultimately the only thing that matters. both trust with distilleries and trust with whiskey drinkers, because you're not going to continue buying $100 bottle of whiskey without knowing the distillery if you don't trust that we have something that is compelling and exciting for you to drink. And for distilleries, they're letting us put their name on the bottle. Yes, we're saying great things about them, but if they can't trust that we do their whiskey justice, that's not going to last. So it's something where for us, that's the whole game. Trust, and that breeds the transparency and all of the ways that we talk about the whiskey, because we need to make sure that stays and that we continue having people that trust us to drink our whiskey.
And I love that the level of transparency that translates directly into just how much data is on the bottle. I mean, we never said this, but the ABV of this is a robust 60.7.
Right. It's past strength. Yeah, we don't do anything to it.
Yeah, all 4 distilleries are listed. The back has the entire story of it. It has the location of the distilleries. It's extraordinarily transparent. I used to, we obviously Bruichladdich features so much in the first film, and I've teased a number of our friends at Bruichladdich about that. You actually had to sit down and sort of make an evening out of reading the tin, because there was so much text on the tin. It was like, oh, I'll bookmark this and get back to the rest of it tomorrow.
Right.
Do you want to talk about I know you guys recently launched the Discovery Club. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because I'd love to. I think people would be curious to hear about it.
Yeah, so we launched in May. It's a monthly subscription that we call our Discovery Club, that it is from a new distillery that has not been part of the Lost Lantern program, at least for this first year. Some exciting discovery that Adam has made around the country. Essentially, it's you get to be a fly on the wall, or you get to sit in his back seat as he drives around the country and finds distilleries that are all over the country and doing interesting things. They're also smaller distilleries for the most part that are regionally focused. So these are distilleries that you shouldn't, unless you live in their region, you probably won't have heard about them. And it comes out of the fact that we now do themed collections. We do 3 themed collections a year that tell you something about what we're seeing in the landscape of American whiskey. In the spring, it was new American finishing traditions. We actually announced this week our summer collection, which is all about estate distilleries. And it helps us with the storytelling and not overwhelming people. One of the hard things about it being an independent bottler and putting out so much whiskey is not confusing people, overwhelming them. But it means that some of the distilleries that we love, we didn't have an outlet for them. If they didn't fit into a theme, there was no way to release it. So this is the way to showcase the hidden gems in the US. So it's $90 a month plus shipping through our website. And it's an exploration of, as I said, the hidden gems of American whiskey across all different styles of whiskey as well.
Cool. I love that.
Tell him he needs to start documenting the trips.
Yeah, well, I would love to have him do that. I need to send him to like photo school or something, because the photos are not always where I would want them to be, but he's learning, and we do want him to take more content for us in general. And he would roll his eyes at me, but he knows it's true. Where
it's something that we've all learned on the fly. I mean, we've one of the things we have is Alphonse, who shoots photos constantly, whether he was shooting for one of the films or not shooting. Then if he's not shooting for one of the films, he's shooting people shooting for the film. So we have pretty extensive archives especially from the first shoot. The second shoot, the Independent Spirits, was so much done in isolation. I mean, Guy and I were seldom in each other's presence. He would do the interviews in Scotland, I would do the interviews here, and we used interviews that were unused footage from the first film. So it was really kind of cobbled together remotely. And, there were plenty of people who, when we were in Leith premiering the film in March, I was meeting these people. They're heavily featured in the film. Mark Watt, perfect example. I was meeting him for the first time in person. Well, that's not true. I met him once before. But David Stirk, who produced the festival, I met him for the first time the day before the festival. You know, it was all done in isolation. But so there's not a ton of behind the scenes for that stuff. But you know, it's kind of hard for Guy to be shooting behind the scenes and doing the interview at the same time.
Because it started, I mean, part of that, you know, for those watching who might not know, it started during the pandemic. So it was.
Yeah, it was born out of necessity. Yeah, so you know we have gone as this always happens with this. We've gone to 55 minutes here, and that's where I usually try to wrap things up, just sub 1 hour. And I actually haven't said something that I have to say, which is this has been a special one-off of Big Man Wheat Dram. We haven't done this in a while. Came back to do this because we're in love with this whiskey and wanted to share it with people. But I want to tell everybody who's watching this that we are actually getting things together to relaunch Big Man Wheat Dram. It's going to be a slightly different format. The only thing I'll say right now is it's not going to be live because doing it live is great, but when you live 8 hours behind most of the people you want to interview, it becomes a little bit challenging. So we're actually in the process of kind of rejiggering the whole thing, and it's going to start up again soon. And because I love doing this, it definitely puts a pin in the end of my productivity for my Friday, but that doesn't matter. I started working at 7:00 this morning. So,
you're fine. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's 1:00 now. You add 2 hours, it's 3. That rounds up to 5. I'm good.
You know, the number of time zones we work across at this point. I mean, I wake up after I take care of the pets and the kids. It's immediately jumping in, and then it can be sporadic. And right now, I'm trying to book a meeting next week for 8:30 p.m. because it's with India and they're getting up starting at 9 a.m. I mean, it's, you know, just the randomness of the days become.
I see James DeJulio asked, will we be able to do live chat? Well, James, yes, in a way we will, because what we're going to do is when we make each episode live, I'm going to go live with the episode on our Facebook group and chat with people there when they go live. But there's a lot of things. We're doing some really cool stuff. I'm really excited. I think we've kind of come up with some stuff that we're going to do that no one else is really doing in the whiskey podcast space right now. But I don't want to get out ahead of my skis because now I've had 2 whiskeys. So now I'm like, I'll just tell you whatever you want to know. You want to know my pin? I'm kidding. 2 whiskeys isn't going to get me there. 3 is all bets are off. Especially, like I said, it's what, a 60.7?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But yeah, it'll be forthcoming soon because we're just really excited to share the whiskeys and share the conversation, and I like just, you know, chatting with people about it, and I figure we should share that with everyone, and few people more than you, Nora, because I mean I love this whiskey. I absolutely love this whiskey, and I don't have any other whiskey that it compares to, and I love that about it because I have a lot of whiskey, and this is its own thing. If I had the space, it would have its own shelf because my whiskey used to be separated out like Isla, Highland, Speyside, Campbellton, but then the bottom shelf of my whiskey cabinet, and yours would fall into this category, is bottles that are too tall to fit on any other shelf. The whole bottom shelf is not regional. It's just really, really, because it's this insanely tall bottle. It's you know, but now this should get its own shelf beyond just being that.
And the bottles that stick out most in my memory are the ones that are so unique that nothing else compares to.
Yep.
Before we wrap up, Mark Pruitt, the editor of Whiskey Network magazine, said meeting Nora was great at the Los Angeles screening. The whiskey was amazing. Well, thank you, Mark.
No.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you as well.
It wasn't great meeting me and you, Nate. I mean, I know he'd already met us. We're yesterday's news, but it was great to see him there. But anyway, thank you guys all for joining us. It's been great. I mean, there's been great chat going on, and I get to see the constantly this is streaming live to YouTube, to Facebook, and to LinkedIn, and there's different view counts on each, but it's been great because we've had despite having taken more than a year off, you know, this has been a return to the best parts of this. So I really and now that we're wrapping up, comments are coming in hot and heavy. Thanks for the interesting information about an innovative initiative. Good luck. And our look at this, Nate, our pal Marvin in Germany, who was part of the editorial team on Independent Spirits, has been watching the whole time. He actually said hello at the beginning. So now everyone's speaking
super
up.
late for him.
I know. Yeah, it's 10 o'clock. So in any case, thank you guys all so much for joining us. We're just literally 15 seconds away from the 1 hour mark. And but I really appreciate it. Please check out this whiskey and let me know what you think, because I guarantee you, it's if you like smoky whiskey at all, or you're, let's say, smoky curious, you're gonna love it. So, thank you guys. Thanks, Nora. Thanks, Nate.
Thanks for having me. This is fun.
Nora.
Bye.